I didn't set out to become a bookbinder, so nothing particularly inspired me per se to become a bookbinder. However, having a friend that needed help in his practice, the owner of BookForge, he was, in desperate need of somebody to just do some grunt work for him. And I wasn't doing anything. Being disabled, there wasn't a lot that I could do, but I could sit on my butt and glue some paper together. So it started out as just kind of helping him out, trying to catch him up, and it turned into learning more and more things until all of a sudden, here it is, 4 years later, and I'm still learning, still growing, and now, yes, it's beyond just helping. I actually, I want to learn more. I want to become a better bookbinder. I want to be better at book restoration as well. My I don't know. I don't think I have any one favorite project. Like I do like learning how to make books from scratch. Another one of my most proud projects, aside from Decrepit Bible, would be definitely the work that I did with the Gutenberg project that we have, that we still have. But in the beginning, there was a lot of going through the pages one by one, making sure the artwork was right, making sure nothing was missing, right down to, making storage boxes to hold them. Just being involved in, the first, what do you call them, facsimiles of a Gutenberg to come out since the 60s is, was a super cool experience. Seeing it in print and in my hands was a pretty awe-inducing moment. One of the big things that came up when I was going through the book page by page is that it seemed like there was a lot of empty space, specifically at the bottom of the pages, some of the pages, and some things that didn't seem quite right in other areas. And when I went and looked at, photographs of older copies of the Gutenbergs, especially specifically of the rendition of the Gutenberg that our facsimile came from, I noticed that there were spaces where there shouldn't have been spaces. And then looking at the original, the facsimile from the 1960s, I noticed that there were whole chunks of artwork missing, which saved our butts. Also a little feather in my cap, I guess. Bookbinding is still relevant in very much a digital age because we still have all of these books. They are antiques. We have books and scrolls ranging back literally thousands of years at this point. Somebody needs to know how to maintain that, and that's bookbinders. And somebody needs to also maintain the knowledge of how that stuff was made and be able to make the same thing today. It's important. Knowledge is important, whatever format that takes. So keeping that knowledge and passing it on to the next generation, I think, is hugely important, because you can only learn so much in the digital format, and holding something in your hand and touching it, and the smell of the musty pages and the feel of that paper. Again, you can't get that from a computer screen. You need to be able to see it, smell it, taste it, and pass it on. Lick it. It's mine now. I think some of the biggest challenges that we're facing today with bookbinding is lack of interest. There's just and lack of apprenticeship programs. We don't have that anymore. We don't teach craft. I'm not talking arts and crafts. I'm talking a craft. We don't often teach like that anymore. The only place you still see it maybe is with like carpenters, steel workers, that kind of thing. So I think that is the major thing. We don't have those programs anymore. And to be honest, I don't necessarily think that kids from this generation understand the importance of it right now. That's not to say that they won't, but right now when they should be learning it, they're not. I think that traditional bookbinding techniques are already being adapted for the modern age. When you look at the wave of junk journaling and art journaling that has picked up since 2020, people are going out and learning, bookbinding techniques, sometimes older bookbinding techniques, in order to make those journals and art books and stuff. They are, and people like me who kind of straddle the line between the two, like, I often share my bookbinding knowledge with people who wouldn't normally get that information, and I help them to make their projects stronger and help them to make sure that their project is going to last more than 3 to 5 years. I teach them how to make their signatures stay tighter to their cover. I teach them use this glue, not that glue, use this stitch, not that stitch, that kind of thing. So I think that it is getting adapted, and I'm interested to see where it goes from here, because I think it is going to spread from here. Bookbinding is already being adapted for these short run prints or personal prints. You have already, it's book talk is a thing. These ladies, mostly ladies, take fan fictions, basically. Sometimes actual print books, but the majority starts out as fan fiction, and these ladies will bind them for each other, because you can't make money off it. You can make money off the actual binding, but not the book itself. So basically these ladies are already taking this stuff and they're adapting it to bind short stories, poetry books, like I said, fan fictions, favorite novels. You can't go far in TikTok without falling down that rabbit hole. So again, I would have said before that bookbinding was a dying art, and it's not necessarily the case anymore. It is being used in so many different ways right now that it's actually kind of incredible to watch. Coming from an artistic background and then coming from a restoration, mostly restoration background at this point, it is fascinating to see how these people are using this information, and it is getting passed on in that way. Some ethical considerations that you have to look at, of course, are, is this somebody else's intellectual property? If so, where's the line between, where you can make some money off of your craft without making money off of somebody else's intellectual property? Because it is a fine line. You have to be very careful about that. And that's, I think, the biggest one. You have to, got to be careful what you're using and whose property you're using. I have probably far less ethical considerations than other people because I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan. I know that, some people have to, obviously they're going to use non-leather products. They're not going to use real vellum. I personally enjoy using those products. I want to use what they used previously, to a point. Obviously, I'm not going to go for the human skin binding. I am not a serial killer. No. Yeah. When you're binding for yourself, like when I'm binding for myself, there's not a lot there that I can't use as far as materials. But yeah, you definitely have to take into consideration when you're working on a project for someone else what they're going to want and what their restrictions are. And, you know, you have to keep the two straight in your head. Bookbinding enhances the reading experience. It enhances the reading experience just like having that in your hand, the weight of the book in your hand, that the craft, that with the time and, you know, that went into making that book, something that isn't mass market printed, glued together in an assembly line in a factory somewhere, I guess. To me, like, if I could hold, my hands prohibit me from doing it, but I prefer a real book. I prefer the weight of that book in my hand and you know, the sound of the pages, you know, flipping together and all of that stuff. Like, that's it for me. That's how that enhances my reading experience. I asked the client how much they want preserved and how much they want to be conservation versus restoration. And sometimes it's also what the client wants, but it's also what makes sense to do. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to go as far as the client wants you to go, and you have to be like, okay, well, I can do that. However, these are the consequences of me doing that. Yeah, you definitely have to guide the process. I mean, everything is available online. You can get literally anything online if you look for it these days. However, you know, it's nice to have information sitting there in hard copy format right at your fingertips as well. And I think we've lost that because we don't consider that maybe there's going to come a time when the internet isn't there for us. And, you know, maybe that's a doomsday way of looking at things, but it's also very true. The internet could go down, and then that survival guide does you no good if you just bought it in digital format. Well, I think that collaboration between, you know, all parties involved is, in order to get to that final piece, there are so many steps in between, and it's important that you have good communication. Emails have to go back and forth, text messages, pictures, you know, an idea board, you know, all of those things have to come together, and all of the people have to come together, and everybody should be giving out their ideas. The client, the final client, needs to say, well, I'd like these things. And the artist is, you know, is going to be like, well, this is where I would go with the project, you know, if I took on this, or if I were doing this project or whatever. And finding that marriage between the two. And you can't do that if you are not constantly talking about every little piece. It really is the minutia of the product. You've really got to get down and dirty with it. We can already see a lot of digital tools and technologies being used. As I had mentioned, these ladies that bind those fan fiction books, they use their Cricuts to put amazing decorations on the covers of their books. I see them, you know, making stencils to do forage paintings. Here in the bindery, we're working on a paper mache type book cover with a silicone mold of some Celtic knotwork. I could see people using 3D printed decorations to put on the covers of their books to create a relief on them. Like, there are so many things that we can use today, that we have available to us today, to make things easier and to make more intricate books than we could previously already. And it's only going to grow, which is awesome.